Hello and a very warm welcome. You're watching Gravitas. My name is Molly Gambhir. Let's get started. Leading cast days ago, it was hoped that the change in guard was the climax, but the twists and turns are far from over. This is a political thriller like no other. The ousted Prime Minister Imran Khan threatens to paralyze the country. He wants snap polls. The new Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif is already having a tough time dealing with the coalition partners and the concerns. There is no sign yet of the new cabinet. The army is openly rebuking Imran Khan, and the economic crisis is only worsening. On Gravitas tonight, we unravel the many layers to this continuing drama and tell you why the political uncertainty in Pakistan is only set to continue.
They just reiterated the statement of National Security Council.
Pakistan remains in a state of turmoil. The political temperature is at fever pitch. Political discourse has fallen to a new low. The economy is staring at a meltdown. The army is still going after Imran Khan. And the new government is clueless about what to do. Let me break it down for you one by one. I'll start with Imran Khan's war with the army. It shows no signs of ending. In the latest, the army has hit back at Imran Khan for claiming the country's nuclear program is in unsafe hands. Addressing a rally in Peshawar, remember, Imran Khan had claimed that the country's nuclear assets, Nukes, are not safe under Shehbaz Sharif. He called him a foreign stooge who could not be trusted with nuclear codes. Last we checked, Shehbaz Sharif had not responded to this attack, but for some reason, the Pakistan army has. Look at the statement now coming up on your screen. The army has said, and I'm quoting, nuclear assets are not associated with any one political government. All political parties who have come to power have worked with full honesty to get our nuclear program to where it is today. Our nuclear program does not face any threats, neither should it be brought under political discussion. Now, this is unusual. The Pakistan army rarely drags itself openly into political battles, but this time it is openly involved in the ongoing drama. It is making statements, issuing rebuttals, indirectly condemning Imran Khan's actions. What explains the army's involvement? Our Pakistan correspondent Anas Malik decided to get some answers. He sat down with Pakistan's former Information and Broadcasting Minister Fawad Chaudhry for an exclusive interview, asking him how the PTI views the army's open rebuke of the party's leader Imran Khan. Here's what he told us.
I have with me Mr. Fawad Hussain Chaudhry, the former Information Minister for the Imran Khan government, the former Science and Technology Minister. Sir, thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to WION. First question, the military has now rebuked the claims by Mr. Khan, the former Prime Minister, about a conspiracy or foreign conspiracy. What do you have to say on that?
I think ISP has just confirmed the existence of latter and the internal conspiracy. I think they have just confirmed that.
So you don't think so that there is a rebuke on that?
I don't think so. They have just confirmed what we said. They just confirmed what what National Security Council said. They just reiterated the statement of National Security Council, and I believe that this is what Prime Minister Imran Khan exactly used same words later on. So they just confirmed that there was an internal, in our Pakistan's political affairs, there was foreign intervention, and they also said it's a blatant one.
You heard that. The army has only reiterated what Imran Khan said. Where and when? From where we see it, the army has literally countered what Imran Khan said. But we don't blame Fawad Chaudhry. When you're no longer in power and the authorities are after you, it helps to act like you are unaware about the state of affairs. Speaking of which, the state of Pakistan's economy is only getting worse. Inflation is on the rise, the currency is in free fall, foreign reserves are depleting, and the clock is ticking. Reports say Pakistan's current reserves can only help it survive another 2 months. In other words, they can only cover 2 months of imports. The country urgently needs money. The question is how much? At least $14.1 billion as per analysts. How much money does Pakistan currently have in its foreign reserves? $11.3 billion. It needs at least $3 billion more to stave off the crisis. Where will it get the money from? Where else but the IMF? Look at this headline. The country's finance advisor in waiting says that the new government has approached the IMF for help. What does this tell you? That the government in Pakistan may have changed, but the country's financial woes are far from over. So far, Shehbaz Sharif has blamed his predecessor for this. He says Imran Khan gave him a stagnated economy. The question is, how long will this claim hold? In just a year from now, the country will be heading to the polls, and by all means, that's not enough time to fix Pakistan's economy. Simply put, Shehbaz Sharif will have to do more than blame Imran Khan for the country's woes. For starters, he will have to finalize a cabinet at the earliest. It's almost been 5 days since he was elected. He hasn't been able to finalize a cabinet yet because the coalition partners are not on the same page. The Pakistan People's Party, for instance, which is Bilawal Bhutto Zardari's party, is apparently reluctant to join the cabinet because of divisions within its ranks. Some PPP leaders do not want to take ministries and are seeking electoral reforms instead. Others are hesitant because they feel the coalition will not even last 2 months. MQMP, another party in the coalition, is also in two minds. Reports say MQMP leaders have also decided to not join the federal cabinet. It's true what they say. Heavy is the head that wears the crown. There could be no better description of Shehbaz Sharif's situation right now. He may have secured the country's top post, but given the differences within the coalition, he is going to find it incredibly tough to hold on to office. The political drama is set to continue, and we will keep following the twists and turns. On to Sri Lanka now. Just how bad can the economic crisis get? Every day we see a new low. Today was no different. Sri Lanka has started rationing fuel. Starting today, motorcycles can get just 4 liters of fuel per visit. 3-wheelers can get just 5 liters every time they refill. Cars, vans and SUVs, a little more than 19 liters. That's all they can get. Even with the daily cap, there is no guarantee people will be able to get fuel because most fuel stations are out of fuel. The fuel stations that are still open have to deal with long queues. Nothing explains the crisis in Sri Lanka better than the situation at the fuel stations. People have died waiting for fuel in long queues. Since last month, at least 8 deaths have been recorded.
Sri Lanka Ceylon Petroleum Corporation today announced officially that it is planning to ration fuel across the country. However, many fuel stations run by the CPC, as you can see right behind me, has run out of petrol and diesel. Nevertheless, citizens across the country, in a desperate move, are even willing to stand in line for hours, at times even exceeding 2 hours, to obtain the bare minimum of fuel here in the country. Sri Lanka has been reporting shortages of not only fuel but also of gas and certain commodities over the past few months due to its worsening economic crisis.
There is a shortage of cooking gas as well. Sri Lanka's main gas retailer, Gas, is completely out of stock. It has stopped supplying. The company says it hopes to resume the supply on Monday. The chairman of Gas has resigned. His name is Theshara Jayasinghe. He is considered to be a strong ally of the Rajapaksas. The bigger worry, however, is the serious shortage of medicines. Doctors around the country have been issuing dire warnings. Sri Lanka imports 80% of its drugs. The government provides 2,500 drugs to the state-run hospitals. Out of this, 60 medicines are completely out of stock. 20 of these are life-saving drugs. As of last week, another 140 essential drugs are in short supply. The Sri Lankan government also owes money to suppliers of medical goods. How much? Almost $13 million. Reports say the World Bank has agreed to provide an immediate grant of $10 million. This is exclusively for the purchase of drugs. But these funds may not be enough. There are two reasons. One, Sri Lanka has devalued its currency. Two, the high rate of inflation. The cost of medical supplies has already increased by 30 to 40%. One can survive without petrol for a few days, but the shortage of drugs could create a dangerous situation. It can put lives at risk. What does Sri Lanka need to stabilize supplies? At least $3 billion. That's what Colombo plans to demand from the International Monetary Fund. The meeting is next week. Sri Lanka wants an immediate release of funds, and it wants the IMF to get involved on another issue: the negotiations with the creditors. Sri Lanka wants them to settle the debts for less. Colombo may ask investors to take a loss. How much loss? 50% on interest payments and another 20% on the principal. Perhaps Sri Lanka wants the IMF's help to convince the creditors. Sri Lanka's Finance Minister, Ali Sabri, had a message for them. I'm quoting, "If you have been part of our prosperity and made money out of it, when we are not doing well, you need to take some sort of a haircut." That's going to be a long, protracted discussion. So will the creditors pay for the mistakes of the Rajapaksa government? We will have to see how the discussions with the IMF pan out next week, but it will not be a pleasant conversation, that's for sure. You see, the IMF will not just hand out a check to Sri Lanka. It will seek commitment towards tangible reforms, perhaps even guarantors. Colombo could be looking towards New Delhi for some assistance. The Sri Lankan government has made a diplomatic outreach. First, the Sri Lankan High Commissioner met with India's Finance Minister in New Delhi. Next week, the Sri Lankan Finance Minister is expected to be in Washington. Reports say he will be meeting with the members of the Indian delegation on the sidelines. New Delhi has already dropped a hint. It might extend more financial aid to Colombo. We will know more next week, and we will be tracking all these developments. Shanghai is going through a crisis as well. The Wuhan virus outbreak there has got out of hand. Quarantine sites are running out of space. So the local officials are forcing people to surrender their homes. Their apartments are being turned into quarantine centers. The move has led to a strong backlash, one that is rarely seen in China. Our next report getting you the details.
They were kicked, shoved and pushed aside. Residents of this apartment building put up a brave fight. Their homes are being turned into a quarantine center. Outraged by the move, the locals tried to stop these cops in hazmat suits. Unable to handle dissent, the cops did what they know best. They cracked down on the residents. The Wuhan virus has brought Shanghai to its knees. 3 weeks into the lockdown, the city is still struggling to cope with the surging infections. The quarantine centers are running out of space. At this makeshift hospital in Shanghai, the patients sleep in camp beds. Yu Beibei was recently placed in a similar makeshift hospital. She wasn't even given proper medical treatment.
There is no medicine or injection treatment in the shelter. So far, all we have is a self-healing treatment scheme. The doctors would come to take our temperature every morning and afternoon to see if it is normal. Then we will fill in their survey on mobile phones and write down whether we feel unwell together with our temperature, that's all. Bathrooms are not very clean, which is understandable because so many people use them and volunteers or cleaners can't keep up. So they are a little dirty. Also, we haven't found a place with a hot shower. Lights are on throughout whole nights and it's hard to fall asleep. These 3 things are what people have complained about the most.
China's zero COVID-19 strategy has failed, but Beijing still continues to stick with it. The anger and frustration of the Shanghai residents is growing by the day. Locked inside their homes, they are running out of essentials like food, and supplies are hard to come by. This week, some Chinese officials were out on an inspection. One local decided to let his anger out. From inside his home, he shouted at the officials. The opposition to zero COVID is growing. Some people in Shanghai have openly defied lockdown orders. They have been arrested and detained. In January, the local police registered just 59 cases and made 26 arrests. This was for violation of pandemic rules. The numbers shot up exponentially in March. More than 600 cases were recorded last month, with 150 arrests. The public backlash poses a direct challenge to the Communist Party. Authorities in Shanghai are moving to crush public dissent. They have now vowed to strictly enforce lockdown rules. That could mean more arrests and punishment for those who dare to question the zero COVID strategy.
Our next story is about the United Kingdom, which gave the world the most number of independence days. No kidding here. The British colonized half the world. They ruled a total of 65 nations. It's been centuries. Their empires have crumbled, but their colonial mindset has not. Let me tell you why we say this. The United Kingdom has introduced a new scheme, a scheme to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. A scheme Britain's Home Secretary has proudly described as a world first. Critics, however, describe it as inhumane and evil. We'll discuss that in a bit. First, the story. On Thursday, Priti Patel, Britain's Home Secretary, travelled to Rwanda's capital. She met the country's foreign minister and signed a new agreement on migration. A pact to provide immigrants a one-way ticket to Rwanda. Here's how it will work. The UK asylum seekers will be packed onto the next ship or flight and sent to Rwanda, a country located 4,000 miles away in Central Africa. Once there, the fate of these migrants, whether they get to stay or leave, will be decided under Rwandan laws and by the Rwandan government. And even if the migrants win asylum, they will only be able to stay in Rwanda for just 5 years, post which they will have to find shelter elsewhere. Speaking about this scheme, the British Home Secretary called it the world's first such plan, which will make the immigration system fairer. You must listen to this.
And today, our approach as two outward-looking countries has led to the signing of a new international partnership, which is a world first. It is a migration and economic development partnership with the country of Rwanda and the UK. Working together, the United Kingdom and Rwanda will help make the immigration system fairer, ensure that people are safe and enjoy new opportunities to flourish. We have agreed that people who enter the UK illegally will be considered for relocation to Rwanda to have their asylum claims decided.
The Prime Minister of the UK is also quite excited about this deal. Delivering an address in Kent, Boris Johnson called it an innovative approach which will disrupt the business model of smugglers. Listen in.
So from today, our new migration and economic development partnership will mean that anyone entering the UK illegally, as well as those who have arrived illegally since January the 1st, may now be relocated to Rwanda. This innovative approach, driven by our shared humanitarian impulse and made possible by Brexit freedoms, will provide safe and legal routes for asylum while disrupting the business model of the gangs.
Now here's the thing. The UK has every right to deport illegal immigrants, but sending asylum seekers to one of the world's poorest countries with one of the worst records on human rights violations is simply cruel. From Britain's opposition to human rights groups, even the United Nations, everyone has condemned the scheme and called it inhumane. Keir Starmer, the Labour Party leader, has called the plan extortionate and unworkable. He says not only will it ruin the lives of asylum seekers, but will also cost British taxpayers billions of pounds. Jeremy Corbyn, the former Labour leader, says the plan is shameful and beyond cruel. They have both described it as a political tool to distract the British citizens from the country's current political mess. The UN Human Rights Council has also issued a statement. It says people fleeing persecution deserve compassion and empathy. They should not be traded like commodities. It has also warned the UK that such a deal will only magnify risks, causing refugees to seek alternatives and unsafe routes. A number of human rights activists have also spoken. They have drawn parallels between the UK's plan and a similar plan that was drawn out by Australia. They say such schemes only inflict huge amounts of cruelty on the migrants rather than rehabilitating them.
We have years of evidence from Australia about precisely this policy measure, which has done nothing to stop people coming to Australia seeking asylum, has inflicted a huge amount of cruelty on a relatively small number of people, basically imprisoned for years and years on islands in the South Pacific, and all at enormous cost to the Australian taxpayer.
Despite the criticism, the Boris Johnson government remains unrelenting. It says it has already paid the Rwandan government $158 million up front. What is this money meant for? It is going to be used to pay for housing and integration of the migrants. Now, here's the thing. There is no guarantee if this money will be used to help the migrants. There is also no guarantee if the migrants will be treated fairly. Like I said, Rwanda's record on human rights is abysmal, and one does not have to look far to find evidence. The United Kingdom has itself condemned Rwanda on numerous occasions. January 2021, UK's Director General for Europe told the UNHRC that his country remains concerned about Rwanda's continued restrictions on civil and political rights. Then in July 2021, UK's International Ambassador for Human Rights appeared before the same body and expressed regret that Rwanda was not conducting a transparent and credible probe into allegations of human rights violations. The same United Kingdom now expects Rwanda to rehabilitate refugees. There could not be a better example of British hypocrisy. Much like the United States, it claims to be the torch-bearer of diversity, a civilized society which believes in inclusion. Its actions, however, tell a very different story. Let's now discuss what's becoming the biggest boardroom battle of 2022. The bid by Elon Musk to take over Twitter. He made the move yesterday. In 24 hours, we've already seen a lot of twists and turns. Let's bring you up to speed with the latest for now. Elon Musk seriously wants to buy Twitter. He is willing to pay almost $43 billion for it. That means a price of around $54 per share. Twitter's market value is around $36 billion today. So Musk is offering to pay about $7 billion extra. Twitter's board of directors said to be considering the offer. The board has pulled in Wall Street bank Goldman Sachs to help out. But the company's CEO, Parag Agrawal, says they will not be held hostage by Musk. He held a 25-minute question and answer session with the employees. Some statements have come out. Here is what Agrawal told the Twitter employees. This provides all of us with this moment where we feel distracted, where we feel a loss of control. I am personally going to spend my time focusing on things I can control, and I believe it will matter. I don't believe we are being held hostage. What do those words tell you? Looks like Twitter will not bow down to the whims of Elon Musk that easily, but do they have any alternative? They do, but it's not an easy one. It's called a poison pill. Twitter's board is seriously considering this one. What is a poison pill? In the business world, it is called a shareholder rights plan. It's a common defense strategy for companies facing hostile bids. They offer more shares to existing shareholders at a discount. How would this work in Twitter's case? Right now, Elon Musk is the largest shareholder of Twitter. If Twitter takes the poison pill, it would offer more shares to other shareholders, put them in a stronger position compared to Elon Musk. That could even mean looking for a new owner.
If the board says no, as a fiduciary, they'll be eating lawsuits for breakfast. So this is going to force the board to do a strategic process, look for another bid. But this, in my opinion, is the current Twitter story with the clock striking midnight. One way or another, we believe the company is going to be sold.
Can Twitter survive this? Will it really be sold? It might be too early to make that assessment, but some shareholders of Twitter are speaking out. They are rejecting Elon Musk's offer in public. One of them is Saudi Prince Al-Walid bin Talal. He says, I'm quoting, "I don't believe that the proposed offer by Elon Musk comes close to the intrinsic value of Twitter given its growth prospects. Being one of the largest and long-term shareholders of Twitter, I reject this offer." Musk was quick to shoot off a tweet to respond. Here is what he said. Interesting, just two questions, if I may. How much of Twitter does the kingdom own, directly and indirectly? What are the kingdom's views on journalistic freedom of speech? Obviously, the attempt was to embarrass Saudi Arabia on the issue of human rights and free speech. But should Musk be the man to decide what is free speech or not? Already, people are expressing doubts over his ability to run a platform like Twitter. Critics say Musk is doing this not to promote free speech, but to have a say on who gets attention. Already, he has been sued by the shareholders. They say Musk failed to disclose his stake in time and made materially false and misleading statements and omissions, quote unquote. Despite the opposition, Musk refuses to back down. What if the shareholders reject his offer to acquire Twitter? Elon Musk says he has a plan B, but he did not share the specifics. Either way, this has become an ugly boardroom battle, one that is playing out both on Twitter and in real life. Whichever way this goes, one thing is certain: neither Musk nor Twitter will come out unscathed. Today is a special day for the three Abrahamic faiths, a rare alignment of Easter, Passover, and Ramzan, a time for prayers and family gatherings for Christians, Jews, and Muslims. But the day, which should fuel a flurry of interfaith celebrations, has ignited violent clashes at one of the most symbolic and holiest sites in the world, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It has once again become a chronic flashpoint in the protracted Israel-Palestine conflict. Our next report telling you what happened.
These are the scenes from inside Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque on the first Friday of Ramzan. tens of thousands of Muslims gathered for early morning prayers. The Israel security forces entered the mosque compound and violent clashes followed. Stones pelted, rubber bullets fired, even grenades were thrown. The clashes, which began at around 5:30 a.m. local time, lasted for more than 3 hours. Over 150 Palestinians and several Israeli officers were left injured. This marks the first face-off in the area since the start of Ramzan. Like every story, this too has two different versions. Israeli police say dozens of masked men marched into the mosque setting off fireworks. Witnesses say Palestinians threw stones at Israeli forces first, while the Palestinians say the Israeli forces tried to empty the compound. The police allegedly attacked the mosque staff and people who came to pray.
هذا القمع وهذا البربرية التي قام بها الاحتلال من أجل قمع شعبنا وتفريغ المسجد الأقصى المبارك على مرأى ومسمع من العالم أجمع، فنحن نستنكر بشدة هذه ما حصل، ويجب على العالم الذي رأى على كل شاشات العالم هذه البربرية التي استخدمها الاحتلال في قمع شعبنا الآمنين الذين أدعوا من أجل أداء صلاة الفجر، وتم قمعهم واعتقال الشبان والاعتداء على المصلين.
The Palestinian Prisoners Club reports that around 400 people were arrested after the clashes. What explains this spate of violence? There isn't one single reason. A lot of factors are at play. The first is that this is a holy month. 3 religious festivals are overlapping: Ramzan, Easter, and Passover, the holiest festivals for Muslims, Christians, and Jews. Each year around this time, tensions flare up. There are processions, which turn into clashes and eventually lead to violence. This played out in 2021 and the year before. This time around, things are no different. The second reason is policing tactics. Several roads in Palestinian territories are being closely guarded by Israeli police. Israel says this is only for security purposes, to keep a check on religious processions. The Palestinians don't agree. They consider this bullying, a way to curb religious expression. Several Palestinians complain that the security checks are stopping them from offering prayers on time.
I arrived to the checkpoint with my sister and other women. They let my sister in. They said, "You have to return. You won't be allowed in." Why? They said, "Just go back. I have been waiting here for 2 hours. I don't know why."
The third reason behind the unrest is a spate of terror attacks on Israeli citizens. Since March 22nd, there have been at least 4 major attacks on Israeli citizens. This has made the Israeli security forces spring into action as the Prime Minister of Israel announced a new offensive.
The state of Israel will do everything necessary to overcome this terrorism. We will settle accounts with everyone who was linked, either directly or indirectly, to the attacks.
Palestinians claim Israel is also targeting civilians. They point at the killings of 2 women and a teenager who were recently shot dead in the West Bank. Israel says they were all perpetrators of terror. Palestinians say they were innocent civilians. Bureau Report. WION. World is One.
It's April, a month every employee waits for because it marks the beginning of the increment season, the season to get rewarded for your hard work. Employers around the world are conducting appraisal interviews. Employees are holding their breath for a pay hike, preparing a list of their achievements in the year that passed. Conventional wisdom holds the top performers get rewarded. They walk away with the best pay hikes. Perform and prosper is the mantra. What if I told you that this year, this mantra may not apply? What if I tell you that inflation could spoil your increment this year? Most employers say that compensation is incredibly complicated right now, thanks not only to high inflation rates, but also to a tight labor market, thanks to the ongoing quitting streak the world over. I'll start with inflation. It is surging globally. In the developed world, 60% of the countries have inflation rates over 5%. This is according to the Bank for International Settlements. In Britain, inflation stands at 7%, the highest in 30 years. In Germany, it has hit 7.3%, the highest in 40 years. And in the United States, inflation has climbed to 8.5%, the highest rate since 1981. As the developed economies suffer, the developing world is also feeling the pinch. Reports say more than half the countries in Asia and Africa have inflation rates above 7%. Only China and Japan are notable exceptions, with a 0.9% and 0.8% inflation rate respectively. What about India? It's in a fix as well. According to the most recent estimates, the inflation rate in India stands at 6.95%. That's the highest since October 2020. What is driving this surge? Well, there are multiple reasons. The foremost being the pandemic and the war in Ukraine. They have burdened supply chains, slowed down production, led to a spike in oil prices, also a spike in food prices. Combined together, these factors are making economies suffer. So how exactly will this impact your increments? What's the link here? You see, when things get expensive, everyone starts cost cutting, and this applies to every sector. Companies adjust compensation plans to keep up with inflation. They reconsider their salary budgets to match economic projections. According to a Willis Towers Watson survey, American employers will pay an average 3.4% raise to their workers this year. Another reason for this is the Great Resignation. It is showing no signs of stopping. People the world over are quitting. In America, nearly 4.3 million people quit their jobs in January 2022. In India, a LinkedIn survey says 82% of the workforce is considering changing jobs this year. These are extraordinary figures, and they have put employers in a fix. They are apprehensive about increasing salaries, knowing their employees might quit soon. And so they are treading carefully and mulling other options, like a one-time cash bonus, a better variable pay, or health benefits. Will these strategies work? They might just, but only if you choose to be transparent about them. If you are an employer facing this dilemma, if your compensation framework is driven by markets, consider delivering a fair message to the employees. Acknowledge the problems you are facing and be honest about your plans. Our next story is about Joe Biden, the President of the United States, and a self-proclaimed gaffe machine. In 2018, Biden confessed that he is prone to gaffes. 4 years on, he is only living up to what he said. At a recent event in North Carolina, he appeared to be shaking hands with no one. Quite literally, he turned around after his speech and shook hands with thin air. The gaffe has opened a can of worms. American citizens are saying their president needs help. Here's a report.
Joe Biden is a gaffe machine. We're not saying this. The US president himself admitted this in 2018. Announcing his bid for the 2020 presidential race, he himself acknowledged his gaffe-prone nature, but stressed that he's the most qualified person to run the country. Not sure about whether he's lived up to the promise, but his gaffes have certainly not ended. At a recent gathering in North Carolina, the 79-year-old US president delivered an arousing speech and then turned around to shake hands with thin air. Watch how. The video has since gone viral, and Twitter users are having a field day. Some say he was shaking hands with his voter base. Others say it was John Cena. And yet others are pointing out how this wasn't the first time, how the US president has on numerous occasions shaken hands with absolutely no one. The handshake gaffe is certainly chucklesome, but it's just one among many, from slips of tongue to falling asleep to abusing on mic. Biden has done it all. At last year's COP26 climate summit, Biden fell asleep for more than 30 seconds. He was then woken by a staff member and then proceeded to applaud as if he listened to the entire speech. This was last year. Biden was caught on a hot mic, cursing a Fox News reporter at a White House event. On another occasion, he called Kamala Harris the president instead of vice president. On yet another occasion, he called her the first lady.
In the arrangement, who's on the stage because of the first lady's husband.
Sometimes he gets confused, trying to find his way off the stage. Embarrassing or not, Biden's gaffes help him stay in the headlines more than his actual policies ever do. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Let's now tell you what else made news. Time for Gravitas Global Headlines.
Russia's guided missile cruiser Moskva sinks in the Black Sea after being damaged, according to the Russian Defense Ministry. Ukraine has claimed a successful missile attack on the warship. Fighter jets from the Netherlands have now arrived in Bulgaria. The country will host a joint air policing mission with the Bulgarian Air Force as part of NATO's efforts to secure its eastern flank amid rising tensions with Russia. Amid the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Egypt has approved India as a wheat supplier to meet domestic demand. Egypt is one of the world's largest wheat importers.
Where that leads, I think.
CIA Director William Burns has warned that Russia's setbacks in Ukraine could lead President Vladimir Putin to resort to using a tactical or low-yield nuclear weapon, which no one should take lightly. Somalia's newly elected lawmakers were sworn in after a long-delayed voting process that was marred by deadly violence and a power struggle between the country's top leaders. Security was tight as nearly 300 members of the lower and upper houses of parliament took the oath of office. Firefighters have contained a massive blaze at a Central California food processing plant that prompted authorities to evacuate thousands of residents, while forcing some to stay inside their homes. NASA attempted a fueling test of its Mega Moon rocket, but had to halt the operation because of a hazardous hydrogen leak. It was NASA's third attempt at a dress rehearsal on the launch pad, a required step ahead of a test flight to the moon. Satellite images show the devastating impact of recent flooding on parts of Durban in South Africa, which has left about 400 people dead as the search continues for missing people. Joe Root has stepped down as England's Test captain. Pressure has been growing on the 31-year-old to resign after back-to-back series defeats against Australia and West Indies. Root made the decision on Friday, citing the toll the role has had on him off the pitch. Barcelona have been knocked out of the Europa League after a shock defeat to Eintracht Frankfurt. The first leg of the quarter-final tie ended level, but the German side stunned the title favourites by taking a 3-goal lead at the Nou Camp. Xavi's side did reduce the deficit in the closing stages, but it was too little, too late.
With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Gravitas, leaving you with Gravitas Images. Thanks very much for watching.